US Representative Marlin Stutzman spoke at a moment when Syria is undergoing one of the most uncertain but potentially transformative chapters in its modern history. His journey to Damascus and his meeting with President Ahmed Al-Sharaa formed the backbone of his assessment, and as he recounted the experience, he opened with a deeply personal observation about the people he encountered. He said, "Just being in Syria and seeing the people of Syria and the fact that they are working so hard to recover after the brutal Assad regime is what just touched my heart." That line set the tone for the entire conversation. It conveyed not only his own emotional response, but also the extraordinary weight that ordinary Syrians have carried through years of war, repression and fragmentation. His emphasis on the Syrian people rather than solely on political leadership framed the entire discussion as one about human capability, resilience, and the desire for national renewal. From his perspective, the essence of Syria's potential lies not in diplomatic documents or shifting alliances, but in the spirit of the nation's citizens. He reiterated that sense of pride and determination when he added, "They are such strong people and, of course, a people that are very proud of their country and they want to rebuild." His tone suggested admiration, but also a recognition of the enormous social and economic burden that falls upon residents who must now rebuild lives, institutions, and basic infrastructure long neglected or destroyed in the war. He pointed out that the Syrian American community, those living abroad with cultural, economic and familial ties to Syria, may prove essential to whatever reconstruction model the country eventually adopts. Their financial and intellectual contributions could offer a stabilizing influence if pathways for engagement remain open. That acknowledgement signaled the importance of diaspora networks as Syria attempts to reintegrate into global political and economic systems. As the discussion shifted toward Ahmed Al-Sharaa himself, Stutzman adopted a direct and unembellished tone. There was no attempt to sanitize or reinterpret the complexities of Al-Sharaa's past. Instead, he stated unequivocally, "President Al-Sharaa obviously has a very checkered past, one that we would have all said probably not the pick that we would have chosen, but he's the president." In that sentence, the congressman captured a tension that continues to define international engagement with Syria's transitional leadership, a willingness to explore diplomatic opportunities paired with profound caution about a figure whose rise to power remains unconventional and, for some, controversial. Al-Sharaa's background includes associations with armed groups such as Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra, organizations responsible for violence both inside Syria and across the region. These associations would typically disqualify a leader from international legitimacy, yet in the chaotic vacuum left after years of conflict, a new political order emerged and Al-Sharaa advanced within it. Stutzman expanded on this history with another candid quote. He continues to tell us that the reason he joined Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra was because of his fight against Assad in Syria and also against ISIS. That explanation, according to Stutzman, represents Al-Sharaa's attempt to define his past not as ideological extremism, but as a pragmatic alignment during a civil war where alliances were often shifting and survival-based rather than doctrinal. Whether foreign governments fully accept that framing remains uncertain, but for the congressman, the distinction is important. The acknowledgement does not erase the past, but it creates space to evaluate whether current actions reflect a genuine change in direction. The symbolic nature of Al-Sharaa's recent visit to the United States also figured prominently in Stutzman's narrative. He referenced how this was the first visit by any Syrian leader since the era of the French Mandate. The gesture itself, stepping onto American soil, entering the White House and engaging directly with US. President Donald Trump marks an unprecedented attempt at diplomatic recalibration. It suggested that Al-Sharaa not only seeks international recognition, but is willing to situate Syria's future closer to Western spheres of influence than at any time in the last decade. That comment hinted at the geopolitical competition surrounding Syria. For years, Russia and Iran served as Damascus's primary backers, while China increasingly sought influence in reconstruction zones and natural resource contracts. If Al-Sharaa were to reposition Syria toward the United States, the Middle East balance of power could shift dramatically. Stutzman reinforced this potential realignment by recounting his conversation in which Al-Sharaa reportedly rejected overtures from Beijing and Moscow in favor of engagement with Washington. In Stutzman's telling, the Syrian leader framed the choice not as one of convenience but as a strategic commitment. The congressman described Al-Sharaa's portrayal of himself as someone working to distance Syria from militant groups and regional entanglements. According to his account, Al-Sharaa even claimed he played a role in reducing Hezbollah's footprint inside Lebanon and near Israel's northern frontier. He also expressed openness to conversations surrounding the Abraham Accords, a US brokered diplomatic framework linking Israel with several Arab states. Such gestures, if genuine, would indicate a historic transformation in Syria's foreign policy orientation. But Stutzman resisted any narrative of uncomplicated optimism. He followed these highly consequential assertions with a sober warning. His actions speak louder than his words. The remark was pointed, signaling that he, like many observers, is aware of the faced chasm that sometimes exists between diplomatic statements and realities on the ground. He then cited the violence that continues to plague parts of Syria, mentioning massacres in Suwaida and killings in areas home to Alawite communities. These incidents raised questions about whether extremist elements remain embedded within local factions, or worse, whether any segments of the current Syrian government are linked to such violence. Stutzman made his view clear when he said, if there's any connection to the Al-Sharaa government, that would be very devastating, because I think it undermines what he's trying to accomplish, or I hope he's trying to accomplish. His message to Al-Sharaa included a direct appeal from an evangelical church in Syria urging recognition of Christian communities and their right to worship freely. During his explanation, the congressman reiterated that religious freedom, respect for all peoples in Syria, has to happen for any meaningful national recovery. He also underscored Syria's delicate demographic mosaic: Christians, Druze, Sunnis, Alawites and other minorities, emphasizing his belief that the country's strength lies in its diversity rather than its fragmentation. As he phrased it, that diversity can be their strength as long as everyone has a seat at the table. The topic of Israel, one of the most geopolitically charged aspects of Syria's future, emerged naturally. Stutzman described a situation that he sees as promising but fraught with challenges. He noted that Syria's actions toward normalization will ultimately determine whether relations with Israel move beyond symbolic discussions. His perspective was grounded in a strategic view of the Middle East's evolving security landscape. He said, I think that we as Americans would love to see us have a presence in Syria, whether it's the business community and partnerships, whether it's even our military. In the congressman's assessment, a US presence in Syria would not merely be a symbolic gesture, but a stabilizing force in a region where conflicts in Turkey, Greece, Lebanon, Iraq and the Gulf often overlap. He saw Syria as a potential anchor state, one that could either contribute to regional peace or, if abandoned, become a breeding ground for renewed militancy. The logic he articulated was built on deterrence. We don't want more wars that we have to eventually fight, but having a presence there would be a great deterrent. This argument also referenced the legacy of abandoned bases in Afghanistan, which he characterized as a missed strategic opportunity. His point was that the United States should avoid repeating what he sees as past mistakes by overlooking critical locations that could serve as platforms for peacekeeping, counterterrorism and long-term engagement. As the conversation drew toward its broader conclusions, Stutzman returned to the theme of balance, the fine line between hope and caution. He argued that while Al-Sharaa's presidency could represent a turning point, it must be evaluated within a framework of measurable progress rather than rhetorical overtures alone. The US sanctions relief model he described would therefore remain contingent upon clear movement on human rights, institutional reform and the protection of religious minorities. His concluding reflection returned to the diversity of Syria's population and the necessity of inclusive governance. He repeated that Syria is very diverse and that diversity can be their strength as long as everyone has a seat at the table. This final point underscored his belief that representation is not a luxury, but a prerequisite for long-term stability. Beyond the immediate political and security concerns, he also referenced how Syria, under Al-Sharaa's tenure, has entered a transitional phase that involves suspending the old constitution, dissolving decades-old party structures, and preparing for elections several years into the future. He framed these developments as part of a complex but potentially promising roadmap. The historic significance of Al-Sharaa meeting a US president, the first instance since 1946, only added to the sense that Syria is navigating a crossroads unlike any in recent memory.